So tonight is a special night. This is a topic that was suggested to me, and it's really a great topic. It's metamorphosis, and how the our awesome Creator God changed caterpillars into butterflies and sinners into saints. So those are big transformations, and got 2 Corinthians there. If anybody is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come. So as always, our mission statement is to exalt Jesus Christ, teach the Bible, equip you, the saints, and to go out and tell the world. And we'll continue to do that until the Lord calls us home. Let's see. Wrong way. So let me start just with a definition of metamorphosis. So if you go to Webster's dictionary, metamorphosis is defined as a drastic change in the physical form of something or a substance. And for example, that would be the metamorphosis of a caterpillar that we know turns into a butterfly. And that's a complete new creation. I mean, you look at a caterpillar and you look at a butterfly, and if you didn't know hadn't watched one turn into a butterfly, you wouldn't have guessed that. And Paul uses the exact term in Romans 12:2. He says, "And do not be conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God." And the word transformed in the Greek is metamorpho, and that means to be profoundly transformed. So the transformation that we are supposed to achieve in going from a non-believer into a devoted believer is a complete transformation. So that's why he used that particular word. So I wanted to sort of go back and do a little bit of review. We've seen some of this over the weeks, but I thought it would be good just to put it all together and be sure that we all understood, because there's really, if you boil down all of the speculation, all the theories, all the science, and all of the people who are making prognostications, whether they're scientists or not, it all boils down to one of two camps. Either, I've labeled them, one is the naturalistic side, where people believe that chance, random, unguided chance, vast periods of time, and natural selection, and that's nature selecting what animals survive, that causes all of the animal structures that we see in the world. Or on the other camp, this is the people that believe in creation, or sometimes called intelligent design, and that group of people believe that the animals can be best described as being designed, optimized. They have systematic behavior, and they have irreducible complexity. And so all creationists believe in intelligent design, the God of the Bible, the Father God, the Son God, and the Holy Spirit God. But we all, not all intelligent design supporters believe in God. So it's a little bit of a one-way street. So one of the things, I said irreducible complexity, and I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. And this is a concept that has been put forward by Professor Michael Behe, and it's been taken up and understood by both the creationists and the intelligent design group. And I'll read it just so it's clear. Irreducible complexity is a single system which is composed of several interacting parts that contribute to a basic function, and where the removal of any one of those parts causes the system to effectively stop functioning. And that is a characteristic of design and a characteristic of creation. And so the example that Professor Behe gave is a mousetrap. So the mousetrap is composed of the little block of wood. You have some springs that cause the the hammer, that bent piece of metal, it's called the hammer that strikes the critter that's you're trying to get rid of. It has a latch and it has a place to put some food like cheese if you're trying to attract a mouse. But in the human body, we're filled with irreducible complexity. You can look at the ear. You have the opening in the side of your skull that goes into an eardrum. It goes into the little canals that have different shapes that focuses the sound. You have the cochlear part of the ear. You have the nerves that go up to the ear. If any one of those parts is missing, if you didn't have the nerves, say you had all the functions and you didn't have the nerves going to your ear to deliver the signal to your brain, you can't hear. If you didn't have the eardrum, you couldn't hear. So all of those things have to be there. And also, example is the eye. Animal eye, human eye. You have to have the lens, you have to have the iris, you have to have the eye filled with a jelly-like substance called a vitreous humor. You have to have the retina that the eye detects the light with. You have to have the optic nerve. Again, take away the optic nerve, the eye sits there, you're blind. Take away the lens, take away any one of those parts. So those are irreducible complexity. And so those are totally outside the realm of evolution, because evolution says you have to have small changes which accumulate over vast periods of time, but each one of those small changes has to give the animal an advantage. So if an animal had no ears and it developed an eardrum but didn't have the other parts, it still couldn't hear, so there wouldn't be any advantage to that. Or if the animal had something that developed like a prototype of an eye, but it had no optic nerves, it couldn't hear, or see, couldn't see. So it doesn't make sense that these things are evolved little bit by little bit by little bit. So tonight the majority, and I've got quite a few really interesting videos, is the metamorphosis, and I've taken the butterfly because it's such a great example. And so we know that the butterfly has 4 stages of development. One is the egg that is laid by the adult female butterfly. The next step is when the egg hatches, it hatches into a worm-like creature called a caterpillar. We've all played with those when we're little kids. It then goes into a stage where it's like dormant, and it goes into a thing called a pupa or chrysalis. And then the final stage is that chrysalis bursts open and out comes a magnificent butterfly. And the thing that is amazing is each step along the way, there's so many critical parts that have to be performed in the right sequence and to the right order, that it just couldn't happen by chance. So, and another thing that is amazing is the caterpillar, as we'll see in some of the videos, is what they call an eating machine, and it actually increases its own weight by several thousand times in about 20 days. So that little caterpillar is active, and that says that the reason the caterpillar has to be so voracious is it's gathering all of the materials, especially the proteins, by eating the leaves of the plants. It's gathering the proteins so that it will need as a butterfly, because when the butterfly is flying around, it's getting nectar. So the caterpillar is a leaf eater. The butterfly sips the nectar from flowers. And so that's more sugar. The nectar is kind of a sugary substance. So the caterpillar is getting all that protein. Its just goal is to get protein so it can make successfully all of the butterfly parts. So I wanted to do a timing. So this is a picture of the egg. After the butterfly lays it, it's dormant for, well, the inside, the caterpillar is growing inside for 3 to 5 days, and then it hatches. And then once the caterpillar comes out of the egg, it has about 11 to 18 days of life to eat. And then it forms its own chrysalis. It takes about 8 to 14 days inside that chrysalis, and in goes the caterpillar, and out comes this is a monarch butterfly. So I just wanted to, this is taken from a evolutionary website. It's to try to indoctrinate people into believing evolution. And of course, they're telling the story of a single cell. The life began as a single cell. And they're telling that single cell over billions of years transformed, or millions, hundreds of millions of years actually, transformed itself into plants and fruits and bacteria and dragonflies and dinosaurs and monkeys and birds and everything. So the way they defined it is evolution. They say evolution is any change in the heritable traits, it's the first part, within a population across generations. So any change, and I'll show you examples, any change in heritable traits of an animal within a population of animals across generations. And my comment is, this is such a general definition, everything is an example of evolution. Your hair color. The hair color, if you made a dog that's black and a dog that's white, and you get a black and white spotted dog, that would be evolution, right? It's a change in trait of an animal that's inherited because of reproduction. So they just make a point, everything reproduces. And we know that the reproduction is controlled by this magic molecule within the nucleus of our cells. It's called DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, and it's got the code. It uses a 4-letter code. And so instead of the digital world where we use ones and zeros in order to put codes into computers, this uses 4 letters, 4 symbols. And so what happens is, this is a case of a single cell creature. Its DNA splits apart, and then it gets reconstituted as 2 strands. So the double strand splits apart, forms 2 strands, and that 2 strand, then the nucleus splits into 2, where there's a nucleus with 1 strand and a nucleus with the other. And then the animal, if in the amoeba world, pulls apart, and all of a sudden you've got reproduction. You've got another amoeba or protozoan or whatever, bacteria. But sometimes what happens is there will be a mistake. So you see these 2 ladders of the thing are matched on the top and the bottom, but in the middle, instead of being TA, it's CG. And so the code is different. So then that makes a change. It can be a good change, it can be a bad change, but it's a random change. There's no planning on which ones of those letters, and sometimes letters go missing. That's what's called a mutation. And in human terms, it's often called a birth defect. So in this case, if the DNA is coding for the length of the arm of the little creature that we have, it could result in a longer arm creature. So you have a creature that has a normal size arm, and then there's a long arm. So then that creature, when it reproduces, it has the DNA that has a mutation in, so it's going to go from there. If it reproduces normally, it's going to have children with long arms, and as the first one, if it didn't mutate, it would still have children that looked exactly the same. So they have a big hand coming out in this video that I've taken pieces out of that says that proves evolution. So we started with amoeba and we ended up with amoeba. It might have a longer arm or a shorter arm, but it's still an amoeba. Okay, then we go to badgers. So they're going to look at badgers. And so the father badger has wide paws and the mother badger has long claws. And when they get married and they have little badgers, and the father has short claws and the mother has narrow paws. So it's wide paws, short claws for the dad, and long claws, narrow paws for the mom. And lo and behold, when you have the kid pop out, it's got a combination of both. It's got the mom's long fingernails, or the long claws, and the dad's wide paws. So you look at a baby, oh, it's got the mother's nose, or it's got the dad's eyes or something. It's genetics. That's how things work. But it's still a badger. But that's evolution. This badger has evolved. The baby badger has evolved. And they make the point, if you have a couple that have offspring, and one has, like, say, furry ears, then when they have the offspring, some of them, you see not all of them, 3 out of the 4 have furry ears, but there's one that has not a furry ear. So that again is evolution. So any change to anything during reproduction is evolution. And I think that's so bogus. It just doesn't confirm, what they say. And they say, oh, well, the little changes add up. They just say that. There's no cartoon or anything about the little changes accumulating into big changes. And they admit, they say that science has found that all dogs are the product, they've traced back genetically of ancestral wolves. So they can trace the DNA of every dog that they've ever tested back to a wolf-like creature in the past. And they say it's hundreds of thousands or millions of years ago. But, that's because their time scale may not be right. Well, we agree. I think there was only one dog-like creature, probably a wolf on the ark, and one that came off and started to reproduce. So the DNA should show that they all came from a pair of wolves. But they say it's easy to get a wolf to change into a little miniature poodle if you do. If the breeders are selecting for small size and fur color and things like that, then they can get animals, and dogs have a tremendous variety of dogs. But it's a lot harder. This is germama is supposedly the first mammal that ever came onto the scene. And so then you've got to go from that to an elephant with the long ears and the tusks and everything. So there's a lot of changes there. But they say not to worry. Not to worry, mutations to the rescue. So just mutation, and a lot of time. Instead of location. We're all counting on mutations and long periods of time where there's a lot of deaths, and then nature does its thing, survival of the fittest. But what we have to understand is, when you look at the details, we've probably all heard the saying, the devil is in the details. So you can have some grandiose theory and everything, and then when you start looking at it in detail, you say, this doesn't make any sense, for whatever reason that you come up with. So you can think of something, but if it doesn't fit reality, it isn't an accurate theory. So what we have to remember is that each one of the body parts has to have at least one protein that codes, what they call codes, for that body part. So if you've got eyes, you have to have a protein that codes for eyes. If you have fins, you have to have a protein that codes for fins. So you have to have a protein for each of the body parts. And the proteins are made out of what are called amino acids. There are 20 amino acids that are in play for making human beings. And a protein is just a sequence a linear sequence of amino acids hooked end to end. So one is connected, it's like the elephants in the circus walking through town. One's got the trunk of one is holding the tail of the one in front, and so forth down the line. So there's a whole line of these amino acids, and then they come out as a linear chain, and then inside the cell you have a little micro machine that actually takes that amino acid string and it folds it into a unique shape. And that shape then is like a key that goes in and unlocks the part of the cell which activates making that body part. So it's a very complex process. It's a transcription from the DNA, it's an assembly of the amino acids in the right sequence, and then it's taking those amino acids and putting them into a machine that folds them, and then that folded protein goes into another machine that activates. So you can see how complex, and that's just, that's barely the beginning of the miracles that go along inside the cell. But everything has to have those coding proteins. And the proteins, I don't know if I said it, but the number of amino acids in a typical protein is about 4,000. 4,250 is the average. Some a little bit longer, some a little shorter. But you can I'll try to think of an analogy, and the analogy I can think of is your computer or your cell phone. So I think of the proteins as being like the programs. So you go to a consumer electronics company and you buy a computer and you get it home and you turn it on and all it'll do is play solitaire. It has a couple of programs in there. But if you want to do word processing, or you want to do spreadsheets, or you want to make PowerPoint presentations, or you want to do advanced mathematical calculations, you have to have what's called programs. So the programs are the things that do the work for you. You type it in a certain way and let the computer use its power to calculate things mathematically, and then you get a result. You can make beautiful pictures and you can do many, many things. So think of the proteins in the cell like the computer programs in your computer. And I just, one example I've used before is if, the theory of evolution said that you had creatures like starfish, has an exoskeleton, it has a very rudimentary internal structure, and to have that evolve, it has to evolve a tail, it has to evolve a brain, it has to evolve a spine. The starfish has no eyes, it has no heart, has no liver. So all of those things, those are all changes. So each one of those changes to get from a starfish to get to a fish would have to be a protein. And I have a little movie that tells you how hard it is to make proteins by chance. And then the butterfly and the caterpillar are exactly the same. You look at the worm-like creature; it has simple eyes, where the butterfly has compound insect eyes. It has a whole bundle of lenses. The caterpillar has no wings. A caterpillar doesn't lay eggs, so it has no reproductive organs. It has stubby little legs. The butterfly has a proboscis, or a nose, that's like a straw that goes in and pulls the nectar out of the flower, and the caterpillar is like an eating machine. So, and I'll have this lady tell us.
Natural selection is blind and unguided. It has no sense of direction, no sense of teleology is the big word that philosophers use. It doesn't know where it's going. All it does is it weeds out from each generation the ones that are most fit, the ones that can reproduce the best, have the most offspring. So that means that each step along the way needs to be an improvement on the previous steps. And our research says that to change a protein, just one protein, can take more than 6 steps, perhaps as many as 20 or 30 or more, to change a protein to a new function, most of the time. Now, is 6 steps within reach of an unguided process? The answer is probably not. Doug Axe has just published a paper on the limits of how many mutations can be required before you get to a new function, an improved function that can be selected for. His research says if the steps, the range is between 3 and 6, that's within reach of the age of the Earth to change one protein. Now, what does it take to change a butterfly, a larva to a butterfly? Well, you have to, first of all, you have to dissolve all the larval structures, erase them. Imagine you're drawing a picture. You gotta erase all the larval stuff, and you've got to recreate adult legs, adult antennae, adult eyes. You have to change the shape of the brain and the connections between the antennae and the eyes. You have to reformat the gut so that it switches from eating plant material to eating nectar. You have to change the thorax and the abdomen so it looks like a butterfly and not like a caterpillar. You have to connect all of these things properly. You have to have the right muscles connecting so that the wings will actually flap. You have to make the reproductive organs so that the butterfly can reproduce. All of that has to happen. How many mutations does it take? It's not enough to say, okay, we can make a story about how it might have happened. You have to get down to the nitty-gritty. How many mutations does it take? And how do you coordinate all of that? Because not only do you have to have the right proteins being expressed in the right places, you have to coordinate them all. Because if you get the eyes right, but the gut wrong, it's a failure as a butterfly. If you get the wings right and the legs right, but the muscles don't attach, that butterfly's going nowhere. It's dead. It's not any good. So, for evolution to have created this sort of pathway, it would take a miracle. It wouldn't happen by an unguided process. The lack of foresight is the major problem. If evolution knew where it was headed, if it was a guided process, then all sorts of things can happen.
So each one of those different changes that she mentioned would require a protein. So you multiply, those are all the proteins, and there's many, many more changes that would have to take place than she mentioned. And each one of those proteins would take, she said, maybe between 6 and 30 steps, 20 to 30, 6 between 20 and 30. Now this next guy is Doug Axe. This is the fellow that she referenced in her talk. And he's the mathematician, computer scientist that has looked at changing how proteins change.
And so when we looked at this smaller question, both Ann and I thought it was quite conceivable that the answer would be that these sorts of things can evolve, and we really wanted to find out how long it would take for them to evolve. And we were somewhat surprised when we scanned the literature and looked at all the studies of this kind of thing and found a lot of people had asked how hard it is to get a protein to move from one function to the next function. And all of these studies were unconvincing. At least they did not convince us that the evolutionary story could work, because they all found that these sorts of transitions, functional transitions that preserve the overall structure, are much harder than we would have thought. They take far more mutations, or despite all the efforts of these researchers, they couldn't actually get the transition to happen. But what we wanted to do is actually examine this thing from the perspective of people who are willing to offer a critique of Darwinism. So all of these prior studies, when they report the results that they get, they always fit them within the Darwinian paradigm and say, here we got an enzyme to perform a new function, and for various reasons that were not convincing. We wanted to say, hang on, let's do this very carefully and be willing to draw the conclusion that, in fact, the Darwinian mechanism doesn't work. So what we did is just found out by experiment what sorts of changes it would take to get protein A, the first one, to do the function of protein B. And we ended up very carefully doing single changes and examining the effect and finding that it would require 7 or more changes. And that doesn't sound like a huge number. Maybe it's 8 or 9 changes would make the thing work. We couldn't actually get it to work because we very carefully zeroed in on particular changes, and those did not get the transition to occur. But what it did allow us to do is to go back to a mathematical model and say, well, if to get this transition to happen would require, say, 8 changes, how long would it take for that sort of transition to happen in the real bacterial population? And it turns out, once you get above the number 6, and even at lower numbers actually, but once you get above the number 6, you can pretty decisively rule out an evolutionary transition, because it would take far more time than there is on planet Earth and larger populations than there are on planet Earth. So that was the big surprise. And we're the first ones that I know of who have undertaken a study of this kind and been willing to step back and look at the result and say, well, what does this mean for the paradigm? Everyone else tries to force their results into the paradigm. So I think that's the big contribution that we made.
Okay. So let me try to make that, I'll try to make it clear. I'll find my, okay, so what he's saying is, a lot of people have tried to make a protein starting from scratch. And that, you know, it would take millions of times longer than their speculation of how long it took for the universe to form. To have that kind of thing happen. So that's clearly impossible. But the question is that he was looking at is, he says, okay, I've got a protein there. I got that one on the left. That's part of a protein. And so he's figured out how many changes, how many mutations have to be in that protein in order to take the protein that used to be coding for a simple I, say a simple single I, and then that has to then be changed so that same protein, after it's modified, makes a compound eye. If you've ever looked at a fly's eye, you see all these little lenses. There's hundreds of thousands of lenses. That's why the fly sees you when you start to swat it. You never hit it. It's because that fly's eye can see in back of it. So you can't sneak up on it because it's looking at you over its tail. So to take something that is making an eye, and now we want to make something that's a fly's eye or an insect eye, it would take, he said, 6 to 8 to 10 or so changes. And so these mutations don't happen every time you have an offspring. These are very, very, very rare. And in fact, the DNA itself has a mechanism for correcting errors. And if, as I said, the protein gets folded in a specific way, if you mutate that protein, it doesn't fold the same way, so the key doesn't go in the lock. If you're putting the key in the lock to turn the lock, it won't fit, because the teeth on the bottom of the key are different. So God has built in so many protections to prevent things from changing. Right? He made animals after their kind, and they can change a little bit, but they can't change to a whole new kind. So what he's saying is, how long does it take a protein that makes a simple eye, you have to make 8 changes, and then it makes an eye that has many different lenses. That would take, if there's more than 6 changes, it would take longer than the speculated age of the Earth, 3.4 billion years. And that's just one. So then you have to go through all that long list of what the lady was saying about the gut changing and the mechanism for eating changing and the heart changing and the reproductive system. So each one of those things compounded. So then you can see how ludicrous it is to say evolution can do that. And Doug Axe is a noted computer scientist. He's done many, many calculations on probability theory and biology. And so the evidence also is we have insects which belong to the class of animal called Insecta, and they belong to a larger group of animals that we call arthropods. And in the origin of the species, the abrupt emergence of these insects, basically, in the fossil record, in what's called the Cambrian explosion, that's where the explosion of life happened, is a big problem for evolution. There's no missing links. There's nothing that is a precursor to the insects that you see in the fossil record, where an insect is going from a simple insect to a more complex insect to a more complex insect to a more... You look at a dragonfly, or you look at a grasshopper. If you look at one of those pictures with even the grasshopper, it's got wings, it's got legs, it's got feelers, it's got antenna. I mean, we don't have any antenna. I didn't have any when I walked in. Mm-hmm. It's got all of those features, and there's no all of the links from, maybe they'd say it evolved from a simple worm-like creature or something, a soft-bodied, but a lot of them have, like a grasshopper has like that exoskeleton made out of keratin, the same thing as your fingernails. If you've ever flipped a grasshopper, you hear it go click. It's made from that same material, that keratin, that your fingernails are made out of. So for all of the insects, there's a lot on Earth. There's no explanation of how those evolved.
Bob, isn't it true that Cambrian explosion, like in the lower levels of the fossil record, they found very little, and the reason they call it an explosion is because all of a sudden in the fossil record there's a plethora of new animals without any evidence of anything in the fossil record.
Right, yeah, that's the rocks underneath the Cambrian explosion, and the Cambrian explosion is discovered traces of it all over the world. In Canada, they've got the material called a Burgess Shale, where there's tons and tons and tons of fossils. In China, they have tons of fossils they sell. Most of Morocco, they have, so all over the world. There are fossils at the top of Mount Everest. So all over the world they have those fossils, and there's no explanation. If they look deeper, the theory of evolution says, well, you dig deeper in the ground and you go back in time. But they get to this layer, and then there's nothing, and then all of a sudden there's just a vast array of animal life. And you can Google, if you want, Cambrian explosion and watch a movie, and it's just amazing. It's all the fossils of many of them are hard-bodied things like trilobites. Actually, I have a trilobite in my backpack. I can pass around afterwards. And then what about the origin of the wing? If the insects evolved from a worm-like creature. Where did wings come from? You know? So the metamorphosis of an adult stage is really from a caterpillar to a butterfly. It rates as one of the biological miracles. I think I'll skip over. Well, there's one interesting. I've got it highlighted in the second paragraph, and it says. Detailed metamorphosis studies have been done at different insect species, show only the way organ systems are formed are quite varied. This is not what evolution predicted. Evolutionists lament no stage or aspect of this physical process can be accounted for or even guessed at with our current knowledge of chemistry, physics, genetics, and molecular biology. It's completely beyond us. So they have not one clue of how these things came about. So let me play you this one. This is the next group of videos are on the butterfly from the movie Metamorphosis.
As you watch a butterfly, to describe what you're looking at, you can't really put it into words. That's biology, it's also magic.
For the Korean audience.
It's impossible to look at a caterpillar turning into a butterfly and not ask how. Their metamorphosis, their life cycle, how did this happen? This astonishing, remarkable transformation. You've got to get rid of or digest the caterpillar tissues. They won't work for the adult. In fact, the cells themselves disappear, but then their components are recycled and are turned into a kind of soup out of which the adult structures will be built.
It's like a different organism. Transitions have to take place in the heart. Transitions have to take place in the antenna.
You have to recreate adult legs. You have to reformat the gut so that it switches from eating plant material to eating nectar. You begin to see the depths of the problem. So for evolution to have created this sort of pathway gradually, it would take a miracle.
When you see certain effects in nature, it's your responsibility as an investigator to find the cause that will explain the effect. If you saw a mechanical device of the sophistication of the butterfly, you would not for a moment hesitate to ascribe that to intelligence, because the butterfly is so much more sophisticated, almost beyond our comprehension in anything that we make. When you process all the evidence revealed through metamorphosis, and then you ask yourself, in your own experience, what kind of cause could bring about these results? I think the only reasonable answer is an intelligence that transcends the natural world.
Okay? This one's my favorite.
Connects two fundamentally different ways of living. It is both a bridge and a workshop, where one type of organism is transformed into another. The magnitude of this transformation has been compared to a Model T Ford that suddenly encases itself within a garage. Inside, most of the car breaks down into fragments of metal, rubber, and glass. These pieces then reorganize themselves into components more complex than any that previously existed in the Model T. After several days, the garage door bursts open and a radically different mode of transportation lifts off into the sky.
Now, an analogy like that is purely easy. But even if it were somehow possible, I don't think turning a car into a helicopter would be nearly as impressive as the actual transformation that takes place inside a chrysalis.
From the moment the chrysalis is formed, caterpillar tissues are destroyed and then recycled to help build wings, compound eyes, reproductive organs, and navigational systems of stunning beauty and efficiency. Yet despite the importance of cell death in the chrysalis, the origin of the process defies the basic logic of natural selection.
One of the fundamental requirements of natural selection is reproduction. You've got to be able to make copies of yourself, in particular of your genes. You've got to be able to pass them on. But a chrysalis, unless it represents a bridge to something yet to come, is really a casket. If you're a caterpillar, you're entering your own grave. Turning most of your body into a molecular soup would be suicide.
A caterpillar, unless it makes it through to the adult, is no good because it can't reproduce. You're not going to have offspring, and so you're a dead-end street evolutionarily. So it wouldn't be any benefit at all to kill yourself unless you've got a hidden plan up your sleeve. You know, like, okay, I know I can go ahead and commit suicide because there's a new me waiting to happen.
The caterpillar is not going to enter the chrysalis without simultaneously knowing, I've got a plan for getting out of this. I'm heading towards the adult butterfly. I'm going to reconstitute these tissues in the adult form, emerge, and go on my way. But that's not how natural selection operates. It can't look into the future and somehow anticipate what an evolving organism is going to need in a week or a month or 1,000 years from now. So if the first caterpillars were evolving into existence, without foresight, it's highly unlikely natural selection would retain a destructive process like cell death.
Okay.
What does it mean to be blue? The wings of a morpho butterfly are some of the most beautiful structures in nature, and yet they contain no blue pigment. Artists use paint, dyes, and ink to make their creations. Nature draws on a palette of biological pigments, also known as biochromes. But there's another way of producing color. It's called structural color, and it harnesses the physics of light at the nanoscale. Neepam Patel's lab at UC Berkeley is studying how morpho butterflies form the special structures that cover their wings, scales, while still inside the pupae. Morphos live mostly in the tropics, and when they're resting, they fold their wings up, showing their dark earth-toned undersides. The brown, yellow, and black colors are generated by pigments. But the other side is all about structural color. It gives their wings a vibrant, iridescent blue hue. Each scale is like a pixel, a tiny tile in a larger mosaic in layers of overlapping rows. Researchers want to see how structural color takes shape on the wings, but normally this happens inside the pupae, which is opaque. So they figured out how to remove the morpho wings from the pupae and grow them in a petri dish. Just like a developing photograph, patterns and colors slowly appear on the ghostly white wings as each scale's surface transforms over time. spreads or refracts light, similar to a prism. When light hits these ridges, a phenomenon called constructive interference comes into play. The spacing within the ridges, which look like little Christmas trees, perfectly reinforces specific wavelengths while canceling out others. This is why your eyes perceive that shimmering blue. Scientists aren't sure why, but vertebrates and plants rarely produce blue as a pigment. For some reason, it's a pigment you don't see much of in nature. So think of structural color as an evolutionary workaround, a way of producing brilliant blues at a nano level, not just on butterfly wings, but on feathers, beetles, even our own bodies.
Okay, so on that one, again, it's a little hard to understand why you would get color from an object that has no color. But if you've ever looked at a CD, or if you remember those old laser discs that you used to put in the machine and you shined a light on them, you'd see every color in the rainbow. And the reason for that color was the same as the butterfly's wings, because they have those little structures are hundreds of times smaller than a human hair. So the structure of the butterfly wing is essentially reflecting the blue color because of the size and the spacing of the substructure of the wing. So it's called constructive. She called it constructive interference. So it blocks out all the other colors and it reflects back blue.
If you think that this image is the image of an owl, then you are seriously mistaken. This is a butterfly. It's called the owl butterfly. And I guess the reason for which it's called the owl butterfly is pretty obvious. The reason why I'm doing this video is because I was in my university in a class, and then one student started asking the following question to the teacher. "Excuse me, teacher," he said, "I'm not a creationist or anything, but I keep thinking about the owl butterflies and how by only naturalistic and evolutionistic ways can its wings take this exact and ultra-precision form of the owl's eyes." Then the teacher repeated the question for the class, and then she said, "Well, I understand your question." And then she paused for a little bit. Then she said, "The answer I will be giving you is the following." Then she said one thing: time. So that was it. That was the answer for his question. This owl, this butterfly, got the shapes of the owl's eyes on its wings just because of time. Then the student, of course, did not reply. Then after this I went home and I started looking up this fabulous creature, which is the owl butterfly, and I found that its wings have this exact shape of the owl's eyes in order to scare off its predators. So when they see the wings, they will think that it's an owl. So they will be scared off, and then the fly will be saved. So, of course, there are two possible ways to explain this exceptionally magnificent fact about the owl butterfly. So, explanation number one. It's resumed in these two words, time and chance. So this explanation tells us that time and chance did this shape on the wings over millions of years and through many, many, many generations through natural selection, which is survival of the fittest. So because this butterfly has this feature of scaring off its predators, then it would survive, and this is it. So if I try to comment on this explanation, I'll say that this explanation actually does not explain how or why the butterflies got these owl's eyes shapes on the wing. Because if you look into this in a specific way, you will find that all of what this explanation gives us is that the butterfly survived. That's a fact, it survived because of these shapes on the wings, which is kind of easy to understand, of course. So it's easy to understand that it survives because it's scared of the predators because of the owl's eyes on the wings. So this explanation gives us nothing. It simply says the butterfly survived because of the shapes on the wings. And then any mechanism trying to explain how and why the colors and shapes of the eye on the wings got exactly there, and I repeat exactly, into the specific particular exact shapes on both wings, not on a single wing, but on both wings, in this pattern, is absolutely imaginary. There is no mechanism to explain it. All of what we have is speculations, and we say, yeah, maybe mutations did it over time, but why was the mutation directed in this specific, exact, and precise form of the owl's eyes? That this would make the mutations a very, very, very intelligent mechanism, in fact. So evolution counts on chance and time, not intelligence, right? So if we say that mutations and natural selection did this, then it's no longer chance, because chance, I assume, cannot produce something this beautiful and this complex, which resembles exactly the owl's eye on both wings by chance. What are the odds?
Okay, so I just, okay, so, you know, that gentleman obviously was struck by the exact similarity. You know, I had that first picture I showed before the video was a picture of the fly with the pattern on its wings, and then I superimposed the owl. So obviously it's there to scare away. It's a defense mechanism for the fly.
A butterfly's life cycle breaks down into 4 stages, each with a specific purpose and a very different look. It starts with a tiny egg, often glued to a leaf. Depending on the species, a butterfly may lay hundreds of eggs in her lifetime. The second stage begins when a hungry caterpillar hatches. Also called a larva, its job is simply to eat and grow. In 2 to 4 weeks, a caterpillar can increase to more than 2,000 times its original size. But the caterpillar has a rigid outer layer called an exoskeleton. Unlike human skin, the exoskeleton doesn't grow with the rest of the body, so the caterpillar must shed its outer layer 5 times. And then it turns into a butterfly, right? Wrong. First, the caterpillar has to enter its changing room. Stage 3. Hormones signal the caterpillar to attach itself to a leaf or twig and shed its exoskeleton one last time. The new layer of skin hardens, forming a protective shell called a chrysalis. Inside, the caterpillar isn't just swapping clothes.
All the cells that are in that caterpillar change. Those cells metamorph. They change from caterpillar cells to butterfly cells, ultimately changing the whole organism from this worm-like caterpillar into a butterfly.
Finally, after about 3 weeks, the new butterfly emerges. Its wings are damp and wrinkled, like clothes fresh out of a washing machine. Within a few hours, the wings dry, and the butterfly is ready for flight. It heads for colorful so it can feed on sugary nectar. In the process, butterflies help plants reproduce, carrying pollen from one flower to another. And as they flit from flower to flower, butterflies are also flirting, looking for mates, so they can reproduce and start the cycle all over again.
Got one more.
Let's face it, butterflies get all the glory, fluttering around with their flashy looks. But caterpillars, they're more than just an awkward adolescent phase. They do all the hard work so that one day they can look like this. As adults, butterflies really only have one job, meaning they're basically flying reproduction machines, powered by sugar water. Their proboscis is made for sipping nectar, but that liquid diet doesn't give them much of the protein they need to make eggs. So that hungry caterpillar has a big job to do. It's not just eating for itself, it's stockpiling the protein it will need later on to make the next generation. It starts by eating its way out of the egg. No leftovers. Then it's on to the main course. These pipe-vine swallowtail caterpillars are chowing down on their favorite and only food, the pipevine. For a monarch caterpillar, it's all about the milkweed. In 2 weeks, they'll grow 20 times longer. That's like a human baby growing as tall as a 3-story building. A caterpillar can't see very well, so it uses antennae to smell for food. Not those big ones on top. Those are for feeling around. It's the tiny ones right down there. It eats and eats and eats, storing up as much protein as possible. Leaves are about 1/4 protein. After packing on the pounds for a couple of weeks, this monarch caterpillar is finally ready for the big day. It weaves a ball of silk on a branch. Then it hooks onto it with its backside and lets go. Look through its skin. There's something wiggling in there. The caterpillar pumps and pushes. Until it splits open. Shedding all traces of its youth, including its face. The outer skin hardens into the chrysalis that protects the pupa inside. Its stomach shrinks. It's giving up its gluttonous ways. When the butterfly emerges days later, it uncurls its brand new proboscis, 2 pieces called galea that have to be zipped together into a single straw before the butterfly can use it. And it lets those glorious wings unfold. They'll take it to find mates and a juicy new plant to lay its eggs on, using that stored up protein. This complete metamorphosis is called polymetaboly, multiple lives in a single life. It takes a lot of work, and butterflies only live a few weeks. But this strategy is not as rare as you might think. In the animal kingdom, it's incredibly common. Mammals like us are the weird ones. After all, our face doesn't fall off when we grow up. Hey, it's Lauren. Can you spot the
Yeah, I like it when the face falls off. So that's just sort of a summary of all of the magnificent things that happen. And on the left is kind of just a simplified picture of what we've looked at. The egg goes in, it grows inside as the caterpillar, it eats its way out, and then it eats the food. Those things are really voracious eaters. And then the last time it molts, and over here it's giving the number of molting cycles, 5 molting cycles. And the last molt, the skin becomes a chrysalis. And then when the chrysalis dries and the butterfly is fully formed, then it starts the whole process again. And as I've said over and over in these presentations, God is making cycles. We have the water cycle as is explained in Ecclesiastics, where all rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is never full because the water goes back to where it came from. So we know that the water in a river goes into the ocean evaporates, goes into the clouds drift over the land, falls as either rain or snow, and that forms rivers, and then the rivers run into the sea. And even the nutrition cycle about where plants are eaten by animals, and the animals digest the food, and then they excrete waste. The waste falls on the ground, then the decomposers of bacteria and all of the small critters take that waste and form it into a nitrogen compound, and that nitrogen compound just happens to be the food for the plants. So it's all recycled. Everything is recycled as it goes around and around, and that's God's way. And that doesn't happen ever by evolution. So I think because of the time, I'm going to have to skip a bunch of these, unfortunately. I'm sorry. And I had something. The way they know how all of these things happen is because they use an MRI machine to look at inside the chrysalis, so they can find out what's going on inside with an MRI machine. So it's amazing. They can tell, and they know exactly. There's actually platelets that do the decomposition of the caterpillar and then the reformation of the butterfly. So there's these little platelets that float around. Each one of them knows what to do all by itself, and it does the construction. But butterflies aren't the only things that have metamorphosis. Our friend, the adult mosquito, I'm sorry, not my friend, it also lays eggs, which turn into larvae, and the larvae goes into a pupa stage, and then they turn into mosquitoes, which are less pleasant than the butterflies. And another animal that goes through a change, it doesn't go through a pupa change, but it does go through a significant change in life. And listen to this lady. I'm sure she's an evolutionist, but she is so amazed by what happens. I think she probably could become a creationist with a little help.
Well, metamorphosis is a crazy thing, in fact. It involves a lot of different changes. In the case of amphibians, we're changing from a tadpole to a frog. And there's a lot of really remarkable things that go on. So, for example, a tadpole is going to exchange gills for lungs. Tadpoles have gills to breathe water, and frogs have lungs to breathe air. And both gills and lungs are really complicated structures, all sorts of tubes and channels and surfaces for exchanging oxygen. And they just swap one out for the other. All the while they're still breathing and swimming and surviving. They also exchange a tail for 4 legs. So they have to sort of dissolve that tail and grow 4 legs. Again, all the while they're swimming, eating and feeding and surviving. They don't get to just lock themselves in their room during this awkward phase. Well, less obvious change is that their digestive tract changes. So tadpoles eat plants while frogs eat animals. And plants are harder to digest than animals, so you need a longer digestive tract with just different machinery. So they have to swap that out. And all this is actually pretty dangerous because if you have half a tail and half a set of legs, you're not going to be a very good swimmer or a very good jumper. So you're easy prey. It also takes a lot of energy. Now humans have a slightly different perspective because for us the problem is often too much energy, right? It's too easy to get your hands on donuts and potato chips. But most animals really are living on the edge. So they're spending a lot of time trying
It's a great question. And she said in there, she said if you're changing, it doesn't, the frog or the tadpole doesn't go into a chrysalis and do everything inside the protective shell. It's swimming around and it's changing from a tail to legs, and it's changing from gills to a lung system right while it's out in nature. So if she said in the video, if it's got 2 legs and part of a tail, it's not much of a jumper and it's not much of a swimmer. So it'd be prey, and that's exactly right. Okay, so the thing I wanted to kind of finish up with was migration. As you may know, the monarch butterfly is one of the animal species that fly vast distances. It flies over 3,000 miles. And it actually takes 4 generations of monarch butterfly to get from the starting point down to their final location in Mexico, near Mexico City, high up in the mountains, and then to fly back. So the set of monarch butterflies that head south, they reproduce and plant eggs partway down the trip, and the monarch butterfly dies, and those eggs hatch, and they don't fly back up north, they continue to fly south. They get to Mexico, they do their nesting and have a good time, and then they set off back for Canada, and they fly, die somewhere, get hatched, and take off and continue their trip. So even death doesn't, they still, you know, the God has made the monarch butterfly with the DNA built in that has all the codes, all the instructions. If there's windstorms, Hurricane Katrina, those butterflies make it every single year. And they have they said they found little magnetic structures in near their brain that probably gives them the direction from the magnetic field of the earth. But that doesn't, just because you have magnets in your head doesn't mean you can get to Costco from here without a map, right? I'll skip over. So I'll play one of these.
Until late in the 20th century, the only people to ever observe the butterfly's arrival in Mexico were the farmers and miners who lived and worked in these volcanic mountains. Then, on January 2nd, 1975, in a forest 70 miles west of Mexico City, a spectacular discovery opened the door for the rest of the world. Millions of monarch butterflies had gathered in a forest of oyamel firs 10,000 feet above sea level. Frederick Urquhart, a Canadian biologist who devoted his career to the search for this colony, described it as a glorious, incredible place where butterflies swirl through the air like autumn leaves, shimmering against the mountain sky and drifting across our vision in a blizzard of orange and black. Science now glimpses the true magnitude of the eastern monarch's migration.
One of the really remarkable things about this migration is that all of these individuals have never made the trip before. There was their grandparents or great-grandparents 2, 3, 4 generations ago. They have no leader who's made the trip before, unlike whooping cranes or sandhill cranes. They don't have an older, experienced adult to take the lead and show them where to go, where to stop and act. But in the end, it ends up on the very same trees, same area, same slope, the mountain that his parents and grandparents left from the previous year.
And there's another bird. This is a bird that has a astounding migration. The reason why it's so astounding is it's over water. So it's called the plover, the golden plover bird. And it's summers in Alaska, and it winters in Hawaii. It sounds like a nice plan. It actually is abandoned by its parents just as soon as they've learned to fly. So there's no communication or teaching of the older birds to the younger birds. And it flies 2,500 miles nonstop without landing. It can't swim. So if it goes in the ocean, it dies. And they've calculated the energy by weighing the body. It burns, it eats, again, like the caterpillar, it eats significantly, and it stores fat in its body, and it weighs 200 grams when the birds start the flight. And then they've tagged the birds, and they find the birds when they land, and they are 130 grams. So they burn 70 grams of fat, and that's enough to carry their fuel for 72 hours. But the flight is 88 hours. If there was one bird. So how do they do it? They fly in formation, because that saves energy. It's like the NASCARs, you've heard of drifting, so one car gets in back of the one in front, and then they take turns, and that allows them to go faster. Well, this allows the birds to fly further. And they said, I have that little picture down there, no bird brain. They said the course of the plover, and it has to contend with darkness, it has to contend with high winds, it has to contend with storms, whatever, and it gets from where it's in Alaska to the exact place within a few meters of where it goes every year in Hawaii. And they said that the navigational accuracy of the plover bird is better than a United Airlines 747 jet plane. So how did they acquire that? By evolution, by random.
They have no brain?
They have a brain. It's a bird brain. I say, that's a derogatory comment. So if somebody calls you a bird brain, you know, you can take a swing at them. So, the last few slides are just trying to give all of the glory to God. You know, it's always mind-blowing to look deeper into God's workmanship at the nanoscale. You know, that you see these things that are so tiny and intricate, and it does amazing, amazing things, and yet it works every time. And we have to give glory to our magnificent Creator. You know, it says that consider the lilies of the field, or butterflies for that matter. Even Solomon, all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. So, a couple of Bible quotes. Corinthians, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come. Acts 2:38, Peter said to them, repent and be baptized, every one of you, in the name of Jesus Christ for the forgiveness of your sin, and you will receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. And in Romans 12:1 and 2, do not be conformed to the world, but be transformed, metamorpho, by the renewing of your mind, that by testing you can discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. And so I'm asking everybody in the video audience and here in the room, as disciples, we want to encourage people to be Christian caterpillars, not snakes. So the Christian caterpillar changes from a sinner into a beautiful saint of a butterfly. The snake just sheds its skin and goes on, and it's still a snake. And did I not tell you that if you believe, you would see the glory of God? And I think that's exactly what we can see in the majesty and the beauty of the butterfly. So I thank you very much, and thank you. Thank you for coming.